Hey, Julio, Ricardo, Varela, Latino Rebels. Honor of Latino Rebels here. It's the Latino Climate Town Hall. We're live on, ready? Hello, Cristela Alonzo. How are you?
Hello. Welcome. I'm doing good. I was actually just so enthralled by your intro already. I was like,
here's the thing about these live things that I've learned in the time of Corona, because everyone's doing them, like on television, you just cut to the chase. Like, you don't need to do like, it's like these talk shows are like, we're still doing late night. And I'm like, no, just show up. I was like, hi, how are you? Hey, everybody.
Honestly, right? we don't, it's funny because we don't got time for it, even though we totally have time for it. Like, you know what I mean? But it's, give me like,
exactly. Yeah. So before we talk about this event, and I just want to thank Climate Power 2020 for doing this. Mm-hmm. We're working with Fuse. Hey, Fuse. Hi, Fuse, everyone on Fuse Facebook. We're working with Now This and Latino Rebels and the fabulous Cristela Alonzo. We're going to be talking about climate change with Latinos. And
wait a minute. I feel like you're saying so many people are involved in this. It's almost as if climate change is important to talk about. It's almost as if this is a necessary conversation to have.
And our community actually cares about it. And I don't know about you, but as a political reporter, as someone who as a journalist for a living, I don't have opportunities that much to talk about, what climate change means to our community. I mean, I'm originally from Puerto Rico, so, my entire life is climate change. I mean, you are originally from, the RGV, the borderland,
Rio Grande Valley.
And you're now out in the West Coast, right? Like in the middle.
It's weird because I don't know about you, but when I got asked to be part of this, I was so excited as well, because it is this thing. It's such a simple, important conversation to have, but also I feel like in the Latino community, it seems like we don't get considered part of the conversation, as if climate change doesn't affect us.
This is what happens to us, right? When people say climate change and Latinos, it's like, it's like, oh, we're invisible. But listen,
like climate change. Climate change. Is that a different way of saying immigration? Like, no, it's something different. It's totally something different.
So listen, should we just bring our three fabulous guests?
Let's bring them on. We got stuff to talk about.
So what we're going to do, let's just bring them on. So Elizabeth, why don't you be our first guest to join and introduce yourself?
Hi, buenas tardes, mi gente. My name is Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, and I'm the executive director of UPROSE, which is Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization, and the co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance, which is a national alliance of frontline leaders working at the intersection of racial injustice and climate change. Thank you so much for having me here.
Boom, Brooklyn in the house.
Brooklyn is in the house.
So we got Brooklyn, we got LA, we got Boston, and we also have New Mexico. So Teresa.
Hola de Santa Fe, Nuevo Mexico, Teresa Fernandez, and I am a candidate for Congress here for CD3 in northern New Mexico. So when I win, New Mexico will have an all-woman of color delegation to the House of Representatives. And I work a lot. I've done a lot of work around environmental issues. It is one of my key things that I talk about. But what I love about being with Latino Rebels is when I was trained as a lawyer, I was trained in the rebellious lawyering tradition.
I love it. All right.
Lawyer speaker. Right. Let me tell you what the most rebellious thing we can do.
What? Yeah, exactly. What's that?
Listen.
Listen. I know. We're gonna do it, and to round off this fabulous panel is Jamie. Jamie, say hello. We got.
Okay. Hola.
There she is. There we go.
Hola a todos, ¿cómo están? My name is Jamie Margolin, and I'm from Seattle, which is currently on fire, but I'm currently living in New York City to go to film school at NYU. And I'm really excited to be with you all today. I am the co-founder of the youth climate justice organization Zero Hour, author of a new book called Youth to Power. And a plaintiff on the Youth versus Government lawsuit in Washington State, where pretty much we're suing the Washington State government over denying my generation our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness by continuing to worsen the climate crisis and work with polluters. So we're trying to implement a climate recovery plan in Washington State. And yeah, like I said, I'm also a film student. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Hi, everyone.
Hey, thank you, Jamie. Cristela, when you were Jamie's age, were you suing governments? Because I wasn't.
You know, I think that at that point I was trying to braid my own hair in a straight line. So Jamie,
I still can't do it.
You know what?
I'm 18 and I can't properly do my hair.
I still can't do it, and you're out here saving the world. So.
I know. So let's just dive in. What we're gonna do, we have a couple of questions, Cristela and myself, and we're gonna turn this into sort of a free flowing conversation. All you Facebook pages out there, if you have questions, we're looking at comments, and we'll share some Q&A later from the audience. So let me just start with a very simple question, given what's been going on, and I'll toss it out to you first, Elizabeth, and then Jamie and Teresa can jump in. So the question I have is, like, what is the state of the climate crisis in our country right now? Elizabeth.
Well, thank you for asking that. So I'm in New York City, I'm in Brooklyn, and today people felt ash coming down. They thought that it was actually snow. Last night there was a haze, and that's because of the fires in California. We know that not only is California burning, we had Hurricane Andrew that impacted Houston and Port Arthur, Hurricane Maria, Superstorm Sandy in New York. 2 weeks ago, I was coming back from New Haven, and I was on an Amtrak train, and a tornado touched down and took out the engine from the train. That's what we're living in right now. We're living in a place where recurrent extreme weather events are happening, and they're impacting the front line. The people least responsible for creating climate change are the ones that are most impacted. So we are in a state of crisis, and it is a climate justice concern for frontline communities, and it's serious. It's happening as we speak.
What about you, Jamie? How would you? Yeah, go ahead.
The state of the climate crisis is that my home state right now is on fire, or shrouded in smoke, and even here, thousands of miles away, I'm also feeling the haze of the fires. And I think people are starting to quickly normalize these fires. Are starting to normalize, it gets in the news cycle, it trends on Twitter, they're like, the world is on fire, and then everyone goes along their business, and then it starts to become normalized. These disasters start to become normalized. Right. And we are in a climate emergency. And I think that something that is important to understand is that we're in a climate emergency, and people in the mainstream are blaming the wrong people. I'm seeing a lot of reduce, reuse, recycle, and not a lot of 100 corporations are responsible for 70% of global emissions. This is, like Elizabeth said, this is an inherently unfair crisis caused by those with the most power and privilege, and then the impacts felt by those with the least responsibility of causing that in the first place. And it's not just in the United States. My family is from Colombia, South America, and there's a lot of environmental issues happening down there as well, specifically the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest. We also have to be aware that we are losing so much of our green spaces and so much of our solutions to the climate crisis. The forests, the green spaces of our world that do such a good job maintaining the ecosystem, taking out carbon from the air, and being a home to so many creatures that we share this earth with. We also have to remember, we're not alone on this planet. We share it with so many creatures. But just like there are fires on the West Coast, there are also fires in the Amazon. And then there's also the added situation of the persecution and murder of a lot of environmental defenders. Colombia is one of the most dangerous places in the world to be an environmental. I think it's the most dangerous places to be.
It's up there. It's definitely up there.
One of them. I don't know. But there's been a huge rate of environmental murders, not just in Colombia, but all over Latin America and all over the world. So we're up against forces that are very wealthy, very powerful, and that are trying to actively harm the people who are taking action against these crises. So we're in a huge emergency, which means that there's none of this reform, incremental, slow change, all of this. Maybe by 2050 we'll do something. None of that. It has to be urgent, radical climate action.
Wow. Teresa, what about Nuevo Mexico and in the state of the climate crisis when people don't hear, what do you think?
So really, I think what we need to talk about is the fact that our crises, the multiple crises that we're in, they're all interconnected and they feed on each other. And it is a horrible spiral that we're in. So we hear over and over again how people of color are disproportionately impacted by COVID. Well, that's because of the environments in which they live. Here in New Mexico, Latinos, both children and adults, have higher levels of asthma precisely because those families live and work near coal-fired electric plants where there's methane being spewed from our oil and gas wells. And that makes them, what does that do? That impacts their lungs and it makes them more susceptible to COVID, which is a respiratory disease. A sad thing to think about is in our Four Corners area where we have these coal plants and we have these coals which we are shutting down, but we also have we have the worst methane cloud. But some of the people, some of the communities that live in those areas, some of the families, they're creating electricity. They're creating what is fueling the nation, and yet they themselves don't have electricity. Some of those Navajos don't have electricity, so they can't pump clean water. They can't pump clean water to wash their hands. These tell you both what the problem is, but then also what the solutions are. So these kinds of factors could make us, it's overwhelming sorrow, it's overwhelming outrage, but it's also clear what the path should be and what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Later.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about it. So Cristela, before you take the next question, our friends at Climate Power 2020, they gave me like facts that facts of the week. Like I'm like Walter Cronkite here for a second. It's like, here's a fact of the week that people might have known, and this one really hit me right now in the briefing. So as of Wednesday morning, 2 feet of rain had fallen on Pensacola, Florida, and Pensacola is facing a storm surge with wind gusts up to 92 miles per hour and a downtown submerged under at least 3 to 4 feet of water. And this is about Sally, right? So even though Sally has made a tropical storm, here we go. It's Wednesday. That happened. We are on a Thursday. So Cristela, take it away as we continue this amazing conversation.
So this next question, and first of all, I love everybody's answer because I love that we made it clear that we're in different locations in the country, yet we still all struggle with the problem. And Jamie, I want to start with you with this next question because you're actually the representative of the question itself. I mean, basically, I understand that we're not going to have any legitimate movement in the climate space circle if we don't listen to the youth activists, to the youth movement, because honestly, it's this thing where I personally feel like the youth is trying to protect the planet because they're still trying to have the life that so many people have had the chance to have. So for me, I want to ask you, like, you guys are going to play a big part. How can we help you? What do you think we can do so that we can actually communicate and engage with you and make it seem like we're actually making effective moves, because again, I'm always amazed. You're talking about how you moved to New York because you're in college, so
Freshman,
that just shows you that the interest is there and has been for a while. So what can we do to help? What can we do to help you and future generations to make some change?
I think the answer is intergenerational organizing. I don't think even though I definitely work in spaces that have a predominantly youth focus, I'm not a fan of like this generation versus this generation, because the way that organizing has historically worked is that it's intergenerational and it's many people working together. I think it's also, there's been a narrative of like the youth will save us, and it's like, no, I'm barely, like, I'm just so behind on my homework. I don't you can't put it on people who don't even have legislative power to solve the crisis, but then it's also disrespectful to, I feel like, our elders who've been doing this work for a very long time to be like, oh, y'all, like, it's the youth that are the only ones doing the good things. Like, no, there have been so many people who have laid the groundwork and have been doing this work before me, and I'm standing on their shoulders. I feel like, it's not just like, oh, youth, good, older people bad. Like, I feel like that's not a right way. And I'm not saying that you're saying this, I'm just saying that that's the way that it's framed generally. I feel like they're like, if you look at in the Amazon, like so many like indigenous elders and people of all generations are coming together to try to stop these companies from cutting down the forests. And I feel like it's less of an old versus young, and it's more of a who's harming the planet and what are the forces that are fighting to protect it, versus like, oh, look at these cool young people versus boo, old people. I don't feel like that's a productive. Yeah. But in terms of like, I guess,
I mean, you're nicer than my daughter is to me, so I'm already.
Well, I feel like when people say
my
okay
daughter's
boomer
20,
or
so,
like,
yeah,
I feel like
exactly.
when people say okay boomer, I'm so annoyed with old people. It's not okay boomer as in like all older generations. It's okay boomer as in Mitch McConnell. You know, there are very specific people in older generations, very specific type of folks. You know, I'm not going to be like my abuela grew up living off the land in Colombia very sustainably, taught me so much about sustainability, but it wasn't even called like climate action for her. It was just the way of life. And so I'm not going to be like, wow, abuela, you caused the climate crisis for me, because it's like, no, she was actually one of the people who was like living in a very harmonious way with the land when she was little, and in a very sustainable agricultural area in Colombia. So it's not, I'm not going to be like, wow, abuela, you caused this. No, it's more, it's about the people in power. It's about the fossil fuel industries, the politicians. Those are the people that we're calling boomers, not the elders who have been fighting for climate justice for so long. Now, to answer your question, I guess there's the best way to like help young people. I think there has to be an understanding of the mental health impacts of the climate crisis. I've recently been going through really awful climate anxiety where I'm not motivated to do so many things because it just feels like when the entire world's on fire, it's like, what am I even studying for? What am I working towards? And there's a lot of like climate anxiety amongst all people, but a lot of young people as well, that I feel like there has to be, I feel like more mental health services and more help and support and mentorship for young people who want to get involved, and more spaces for community. I think in terms of like specific youth initiatives, funding is always an issue in terms of like actually, you know, helping fund different initiatives, helping support different initiatives. I'd say the main thing that you can do is work with youth for intergenerational causes, and don't kind of put it on people's shoulders. I've talked to so many like governors who are literally the governor or senators or people who are in power. They're like, you're going to save the world. And it's like, you are literally in power. Why is this on me? So I guess that's the complicated answer to your question. I realize I rambled, but yeah.
It's a really interesting, it's a really, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add, because our organization's intergenerational, we've sent 4 young people to Antarctica, 3 to the North Pole, 1 spoke at the COP. We hold the largest gathering of young people of color on climate change in the country. We've had 8 of those. And there's this narrative lately that young people suddenly woke up when our movements have always been intergenerational. And this conversation of elder versus youth, like there's nobody in the middle, is crazy. I think it's an Anglo-American construct. But in the climate justice movement and the environmental justice, whether you're talking about Poder in California or SWAT in Texas, or you're talking about organizations in Detroit or in Brooklyn, all our organizations are intergenerational and have always been, because leadership is a continuum. And so there is no way of building power unless we build it together, unless we're learning across generations with each other at the table. And that idea of one generation leading and the other one being, or that young people, older people are the ones who hold wisdom, is kind of arrogant. When young people have wisdom too, we have a lot to learn from them and they have a lot to learn from us. So whether you're talking about the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, or the American Indian movement, young people of African and indigenous ancestry have always led our movements, all of them, all the social justice movements. So I just wanted to add that, because all of a sudden people are acting like it's a new thing. It's an our thing. We've been doing this thing.
You know, I will make a point to say that actually I'm 41, and that's all I wanted to say. No, but like,
wow.
No.
There's nothing wrong.
Yeah, and I also want to be clear, when I said elder versus young, I wouldn't mean like old versus young. I was
no. But please, I want to actually make it clear why I asked that question, because I'm right in the middle. So, you know, it's that thing where, like, for me, when I was in school, and I mean elementary, you know, they taught us about Earth Day And Earth Day was a big deal. And around that time, that's when people really started trying to protect the ozone layer, you know, and it got to the point where, you know, I come from, like, I'm a first generation Mexican American. My mom had that white, like Aquanet hairspray that she used to put on, you know what I mean?
Mommy, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And I remember, like, during my childhood, hairspray bottles, the aerosol cans like that were taken out from the industry. They were taken out for a while because of what damage it was doing to the ozone layer. And then all of a sudden they came back. And, you know, for someone like me who was so into saving the environment as a kid, I always wondered, like, did we save the ozone layer? Is that why you're bringing back aerosol cans into production? Because back then, before the internet, you didn't have the information we had in like we do right now.
I was just going to say that there's the way environmentalists think about it, which is save the ozone. And then there's the way our people think about it, which is that our communities live within their carbon footprint. We've always recycled, repurposed, and reused because there's nothing like necessity that makes you sustainable. And we've always honored Mother Earth and our traditions. And so this is an opportunity right now for us to reclaim those traditions. So there's a real difference between the environmentalists and then the environmental justice and climate justice folks, because we literally are being impacted by things that we didn't create. We have been honoring Mother Earth.
Right. So I want to bring Teresa. I wanted to ask you a question, but can I ask you the question? Then you can like jump in on that, because you're running for Congress. If you can talk about, you know, continue the conversation, but also kind of put a button on your own platform as a Nueva Mexicana, like happening, like what are you running on? So feel free to jump in and talk, because the intergenerational thing to me is completely overlooked in our community. And I'm saying, yeah, we are intergenerational, like all the time. Like we should be doing it all the time. So go ahead, Teresa, talk about that, but also talk about your platform as well in this context.
Okay, so I'll jump in. I think one of the things that does move people, right, is one of the most powerful speeches given on climate change in New Mexico was at an event I was at where Maya, she was 12. And, you know, we had some great, you know, we had all these politicians speak, we had these candidates speak, we had people, scientists speak, but it was the 12-year-old who instead, you know, she lost her speech because she stood up in front of everybody and she got a little freaked out. And she started crying and she started sobbing. And she said, how come you haven't protected us? Why did you take away my future? And we all cried with her. And there is something about that, right? That it is, and that there is something about the youth in terms of that, is that we have an obligation to not take away people's future. And what my platform is based on is actually this idea of placing in the middle of my campaign and who I am, the concept of love. The concept of love, because it is the most powerful, you know, emotion that we can have to do what we need to do. And when we love somebody, whether it's a familia and it's a friend, or it's an ideal, or it's a planet, and we know that that person is in pain, we're going to do everything we can to help it. And right now, our democracy is in pain. And right now, our planet is in pain. And I want us to do everything we can to protect what we love. And when you go to my website, that's on the top, is protect what we love, protect this beautiful place we call home, because it's that kind of emotion, it's that kind of energy that also fueled the civil rights movement, that fueled John Lewis, that fueled so much, is to do something from that place of love. And so my campaign is very much rooted in protecting the planet that we call home, but right, the beautiful place we call home, but also the beautiful community we call home, our beloved community, protecting our future. And so all of those things, and that resonates, and that gets young people excited, that gets los abuelitos excited, that gets everybody excited, because they want to be about something that makes a difference for what you love. And so I think there is, did I tie the two together there?
Oh, are you running for Congress? Is she running for Congress? Because I was like, we tossed that around. Listen, before we get to the next question that I'll ask, here's another fact of the day on my Walter Cronkite. So let me just, this is something I did not know, to be honest with you. On the West Coast, we're talking about the fires. They are likely already causing an upsurge in fatal heart attacks and hospitalizations for people with asthma. And it might also make people more vulnerable to COVID-19. So I knew about the COVID-19. I did not know about the fatal heart attacks and the stress and the things because that's another thing that's in all this, right? The stress that happens with climate change on our bodies and our communities. So let me ask this question, because, the notion of what is a green economy. See me, Cristela, you see what I did? Quotes, yes. Green economy. Let's talk about that impact on the Latino community, whether the good side of it, or is it, green, how would green jobs benefit our families? So let me start we'll start with Elizabeth and then have Teresa and Jamie jump in. So Elizabeth, because I think when you hear green economy, it just feels to me, it feels like it's so not our world, right? I think of like white liberal spaces when I hear green economy. I don't think of the Latino community. At least I know the Latino community is involved, but it doesn't come to me as a perception. So how do you begin to unpack that?
Well, thank you for that question, because there is a difference between the way that the mainstream green groups define a green economy and how those of us who come from the front line and are doing climate justice work define it. We talk about, when people talk about a Green New Deal, we talk about a frontline Green New Deal. And we talk about how that comes from the language called a just transition, how we move from an extractive economy to one that is regenerative, and where we're creating local livable economies. And you could read a lot about that in the Climate Justice Alliance and Movement Generation website, because literally frontline leaders all over the country have been developing those models and those concepts. We're talking about renewable energy and energy efficiency and sustainable manufacturing in a place like New York City, right? People don't think about that, but we've got these industrial sectors that could be building for that climate future. We even passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and that was a frontline led legislation with 200 member groups from all over New York to create 150,000 climate jobs over the next 10 years. And so the idea is that we would go carbon neutral by 2050. But the process and how workers get treated is just as important as the outcomes. So if we're talking about solar, if we're talking about offshore wind, if we're talking about products that people define as green, they can't be run by corporations that are abusing workers, that are not paying them well. The process can't be exposing them to contaminants and to toxics and toxicants. And so all of that is wrapped up into this idea of a just transition. And so, and what we find sometimes is that these green products, so this green economy, benefits the most wealthy and the most privileged people in our community. And we're the ones that make the product, but we are exposed to all of the contamination. So for us, talking about climate jobs or green jobs is more than just the outcome, the thing, the infrastructure. It's also the process and who's involved in determining and monitoring whether that process protects us or hurts us. So it's much more nuanced, and the language is just, people they extract our language, right? They appropriate our language and they give it a different definition, which is not what was intended. We are being very careful about thinking about not recreating a capitalist system that has put us in the position that we're in right now. We are really thinking about how do you decolonize the economy, and how do we start creating different economic systems that are going to make it possible for us to survive and thrive.
Yeah. Teresa, what about you when you hear green economy?
Right. So here in New Mexico, there was a time where it was Republicans who mostly talked about the Green New Deal, and they said what it was not. And so I actually wrote an op-ed that said a Green New Deal for New Mexico, so that we could have people start imagining what their future could be like. I talked about creating the Route 66. For those of you who know the Route 66, solar, where instead of having cars coming through it, we are exporting and sending our beautiful sun from New Mexico.
Is there a new song with that? Because I want that. It's like get your kicks on Route 66, right? No.
Yes, get your kicks, get your sun. get your sun, get your electricity, get your energy, and let's keep this. But what it means is that we're going to start training. It means that for our Latinos, for our, the workers who are working now, but those who are looking to, either do they want to go and become the engineer who's going to work on green, the latest and the amazing things that we need to retrofit to create those the grids that we're going to need? Or are they going to be the solar installers? Are they going to be the technicians? It means investing in the training and education that we're going to need for people to get that and to get those good jobs, and then to unionize those good jobs, right? So that they are protected and that we do have higher rates. It means for our farmers, I represent a rural area. My district is the size of Pennsylvania, and I have ranchers and farmers who want to stay on their land. And it means doing regenerative agriculture so that we are pulling carbon from the air while we are making very tasty, if you like beef, the best beef is grass-fed, and it's pulling the carbon from the air. And for our farm workers, because a lot of Latinos, we are picking the crops. It means not using those pesticides. It means doing a more regenerative agriculture that's going to be healthier for them, so they're not ingesting those fumes. And let me also say, it means getting people from New York out to nature, right? So that they can connect. It means building the trails and building the places that we need so that everybody can go out and enjoy nature, so that we realize how precious it is. Because it is when you are in those quiet places of our beautiful home, of our streams, of our forests, of the sunflower fields, that you realize its fragility, and it talks to you, and you want to do everything you can to save it, right? And so it means all those things.
Yeah, Jamie, wow, I'm at peace. I'm like in a Zen moment just hearing. What about you, Jamie? About when you hear like green economy and when like.
I mean, I guess first of all, like the phrase like our Latino communities has been repeated a lot, and I guess I also want to emphasize for people watching that Latinidad is not a race, it's an ethnic and cultural group. So there are Latinos who look like me, there are Latinos who are very dark skinned, there are Afro-Latinos, Indigenous Latinos, white Latinos.
The disclosure, the necessary disclosure for people.
The necessary disclosure. So I feel like there's no like one Latino experience, because there are many races and privilege levels. And obviously someone with my skin tone is going to go through the world with a lot more privilege than a Latino who is of darker skin. And so I just wanted to like emphasize that like we exist at different privilege levels and stuff like that. I think so much of what I was thinking about was already said, of just how we can't just try to, like Elizabeth said, we can't just try to recreate capitalism, green flavored capitalism. Like it can't be like capitalism with a little leaf on it, like yay, like that. If it's exploitation, it's exploitation. So I feel like a lot of, when we're also looking at solutions, it also means like looking towards ancestral solutions too. So I was reading so much about the wildfires that obviously like a lot of this is because of the climate crisis, but also like it wouldn't have been as bad if indigenous land management practices were being followed. Cultural burning. Burn. Is that what it's called? Cultural burning?
Cultural burn, yeah.
Okay, so there's just so many like ways of agriculture and land practices and different things like that. When we're talking about rebuilding, a lot of the knowledge is already there, and it's so funny how scientists are like rediscovering things that like communities have already known. That like when we think about wildfires, because unfortunately a lot of climate damage has already been locked into the atmosphere. It's not like, oh, if we act now, we're never going to have another fire again. No, unfortunately, we can do a lot to prevent it from getting a lot worse, but a lot of the damage is locked in, which means we also have to make our economy resilient, climate resilient, in terms of storms, floods, fires are going to happen. How can we make sure people don't die, people don't get hurt, and that the nature also survives as well, and that communities are safe? A lot of that means like in making general like our general practices and legislation and policies and ways of reaction in tune with a lot of indigenous knowledge that has already existed as well. And that also means putting people in charge and in positions of power who have that knowledge as well. So it can't just be like people in power. Speaking of people in power, it's quite funny to me. Lately, I saw, I think it was the governor of California. He's like, we need better leadership. I'm like, you are literally the governor. What do you like? I don't understand a lot of yeah.
So
So
listen,
anyway, I don't want to ramble, but yeah.
No. So before I turn over because the last question has to do with, and Cristela can take it, about electoral politics, but I do have my Walter Carr. Like, I want to share.
Time for a fun fact.
Yeah. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about some polling data that's important, that actually talks about Latinos in climate change. And I think our director, Andy, can probably put this up, the 77% of youth. So 77% of youth and Latino voters, right, support bold climate action. So it's really important to it's not just like when you guys are talking about, oh, this is a young thing or whatever. It's cultural, it's intergenerational. And to see the consistent polling in the Latino community for bold climate action kind of leads us to our last question in the middle of this 2020 election, that and feel free, go take it away, Cristela Alonzo.
Fun fact over.
Over fun fact. Yeah.
Like, basically, actually, Julio, you make a great point, which is, this is how I see environmental issues too, especially with climate change. Climate change is really the foundation for so many issues we deal with. It's racial issues, it's economic issues, it's all tied together. So my question is, and we'll start with Teresa, what necessary actions do candidates that are running, that are trying to get people, to believe that they're for climate change and changing things and putting an emphasis on that, what can the candidates do to actually make the community feel like they're interested in doing it? And I want to focus on the Latino community, especially because, the joke was at the beginning, I said, usually they think that all we care about is immigration or, what have you, and it's really hard to kind of convince people that we are people and we care about so many issues. So, you're running for office. How do you, what specific things do you think are helpful to get the community on board with you?
Well, I'm really lucky in that I represent New Mexicans. Latinos in New Mexico do come out and vote, and Latinos are right now our biggest voting bloc. They're one of my key voting blocs. My district is 20% Native American, and I have worked with Native Americans on preserving cultural sites, on saving the Grand Canyon from some of those overflights, of fighting the building of coal mines because of what it would have done in terms of its impact on sacred and cultural sites. And people here want an environmental champion. I am an environmental champion, and that's actually why I think I won in the primary, and because that's what they wanted. They wanted that. But what it means too is you need to be talking about it all the time. Campaigns aren't just about who wins. It's about what do we talk about. And that's what I think is key. And so the way we talk about that is that we are, when people show up and, put things in the chat, and if you're showing up at whomever's Zoom or whatever it is, raise it, because then we get to talk about it. So I'm talking about it all the time because actually it is really wonderful. We are in New Mexico, we're a landed people. Whether you're indigenous or Latino, we are from the land, sort of the same way they are in the Rio Grande Valley, which I actually have spent some time down there with the land. I've spent some time with the land grant heirs down in your part of the world. But they're from the land, right? We understand the importance of it. In cities, it's different because we then understand, what's happening to us. But it is the idea of constantly talking about it. And I will say that here, when I'm talking to the rejitos and we call it plebe, the gente, they want to know what the position is on climate change. They want to know what we're going to do about it because they see it happening in their lives. And that's what they want. Right. So that's what
we're yeah.
Elizabeth, how about you, just your perspective, because I think it's interesting because you are in the Bronx, you're in New York City, and for me, it's it is, people can understand New Mexico, outdoors, indigenous, everything. You also mentioned indigenous, it's, what is it about someone that comes from such a big metropolitan area? Like, what is it that you find is necessary for the politicians in those kind of areas that are so heavily populated to actually try to speak out about climate change, where people in the metropolitan areas will pay attention and really know that they're serious about it?
So I think that in our communities, and we're really talking about people of African and indigenous ancestry living in New York City, of different ethnicities, of different Latino ethnicities. I'm Boricua. We are the ones who suffer from asthma, upper respiratory disease, all the health disparities that are impacted by the discriminatory citing of environmental burdens in our communities. And people get that. People get the fact that their health and those consequences are related to the disparate citing. They also are beginning to understand that this legacy, that climate change is the angry child of a legacy of extraction, of capitalism, of colonialism, and of slavery. And they can trace that back, that there is a reason why our bodies remember, that it's epigenetics, and why our bodies are storing the harm of generations passing on to each other. So race is at the center of any conversation about climate change. We can't talk about climate change without talking about its impact on the global South, or talking about its impact on people of Black, Indigenous, and people of color here in the United States. And people are really understanding that in urban areas where we're so densely populated, so close to each other, and right up against highways, power plants, waste transfer stations, all of those things that are making us sick. And so there is this consciousness now that is forcing the conversation, and we have been able to pass legislation citywide and statewide. What you would think is a Green New Deal is what the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act is, right? And so that would actually move about 35% of all the funding that will be generated to basically for infrastructure, for basically reducing carbon and going carbon neutral. And so all of the elected officials are being asked, and it's being demanded that they integrate climate in decision-making and also in interagency coordination. Because what happens with climate and environment is that they put it in the realm of one agency. In New York City, in New York State, it would be the Department of Environmental Conservation, but that needs to live in the Department of Education, and the Department of Labor, and the Department of Energy, and the Department of Agriculture.
It's all connected.
It all has to be integrated, and funding has to be made available through all of those. So that level of sophistication doesn't often exist with our representatives, because historically our representatives come out of the civil rights movement and are thinking in very conventional ways. They're thinking criminal justice, they're thinking immigration, they're thinking employment. And we're saying, no, you need to think about energy, you need to think about agriculture, you need to get out of those conventional boxes, because there's nothing more unconventional than climate change. And that is being driven by the front line of the climate crisis. And so we're seeing it now, and it's taking, I'm not gonna lie, it's slow. In just New York City, just this past week, we had a hearing where a developer wants to take an industrial waterfront and turn it into high-end retail and a party destination. And we're saying the industrial sector needs to build for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. It needs to build for food security. And so, those are some real big local fights with regional impacts in New York City.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. JB.
I'm muted. Okay. I was just listening so much to what everyone else was saying that I almost forgot the original question. So if you could repeat it, that would be wonderful.
The original question,
I was just like hypnotized.
Me too. I was like, but the electoral politics are sort of now in the moment. And then we haven't even mentioned the presidential election. So I feel like if you guys want to go there for the last couple of minutes before we take questions, if you want to start that, are there contrasts? But it's such an obvious question, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. Yeah.
Go for it.
I've been yawning so much. I'm very interested in this conversation. I just stayed up till 4 a.m. last night for no real reason.
You're like,
I was like, I'm gonna get so much homework done, and then
Joey, you're like calling yourself up for nothing.
I know. We would have been totally fine. We totally understand. You're in college.
I know. You're learning.
Yeah, it's all good. Okay, Jamie.
I'm a freshman in college, so it's more of like I'm just trying to like get my bearings and not like
of course
get overwhelmed. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, I think my answer, I remember, I think this was Bernie Sanders, who said, someone asked him something about, the economy, and he started talking about climate change, and they were like, it was during a debate, and they were like, no, we asked you about the economy, and he's like, I know, it's the same thing. I feel like that's something so difficult to grasp. Like, even now that politicians, it's like a cool thing, not cool, but like now they have to kind of say something about climate change because it's like everyone cares about it, but they'll do it not out of genuine like care, but it's like, well, this is an issue that people care about now. But they have it like on their list, and I feel like the list is very antiquated of like climate, economics, this, that. It's like, it's all the same thing, and we need more people in office who completely understand that. And I feel like, you know, electoral politics, it's broken my heart a lot. You know, I haven't properly gone through like a proper heartbreak in terms of like relationship wise, but elections have broken my heart many times. I was a surrogate for the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I was like working really hard to get him elected, and then I was a delegate for Bernie at the Democratic convention. By then I knew that he wasn't going to get it, but I was there honorary as well. And then now, you know, I've made it very clear that I will be voting for Joe Biden because I don't think that our planet can afford another 4 years of Trump. And I think that is a very, very dangerous way to go back. But I don't believe, like, I feel like there are too many centrists who are like, oh, we can just get Joe Biden in and then like relax and it's all going to be fine. And now that Trump's out, it's chill. It's like, no, we get Joe Biden and Kamala in, and then we pressure them like hell. It's like, I saw there was this quote or this tweet that was like, our plan is to get the Democrats in and then bully the Democrats into taking action. That's really all we can do, because like we literally just can't afford another 4 years of Trump. We can't. It's really scary to think about how more emboldened, you know, all these hate groups and everything is going to be if he gets another victory. I really don't want to think about it. So I've been working to try and get as many people out to vote, but I think that people also need to understand that the change doesn't just come from the presidential; it also comes from the legislative and a lot of
the work that you guys are doing.
The environmental movement pretty much gave the election to Ed Markey because he was the I think
my home state. That's right. I mean, you say what you want, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was he was 73-year-old politician who redefined himself. I witnessed it in Massachusetts with my very eyes, and he turned into
have won if
the Green Warrior, which he wouldn't have won, right, Jamie? Say it. He wouldn't have won because of the climate movement.
He wouldn't have won if it wasn't for the environmental movement. And here's the thing. I feel like too many politicians are trying to cling to the center and think that's going to save them and that's going to get them elected. Clinging to the center did not work in 2016. And I am so angered that we're trying it again this year, but because it's already proven not to work. When you cling to the environmental movement and the youth and the people fighting for climate justice and all those people, that's how you win. And I feel like politicians need to understand that the center has nothing to offer. It's the environmental movement. It's the people who want radical change, because centrism, when the sky is the wrong color, centrism is not the response to that. The sky is literally red. There's no let's talk about some market-based solutions, the free, let's discuss. I saw this tweet that was like, it's nothing like a blood red skies to get you excited about gradual market-based climate solutions. So that's my
Elizabeth, do you want to put a wrap on this before we move to the questions and answers? Because you wanted to jump in and I didn't.
No, I was just excited by everything she was saying. She was dropping the mic.
She was like, the college student. She's like,
yes.
I want to know when Jamie's not tired in college. You know, now she's like, I'm tired and I just dropped knowledge. But so
as a token politician on the
I know, I was waiting. As for the someone who's running, go, Teresa.
I will say that I think we are in this historic moment, and that we need to take advantage of this historic moment where we are going to say we need to address all of these interconnected crises at the same time. And this is the moment. And I think we don't do ourselves a lot of good when we start saying we're going to start beating up on each other, but rather that we really need to say there are enough of us, including, you know, Nancy Pelosi, one of her key things that she cares about is actually children and the environment. And she's done some other stuff. So we're going to have allies in places that we don't even know that we now have allies. There are going to be people who are even maybe some of those Republicans who are in those places where their people in their communities are getting beat up by the climate crisis. And so what we need to do is actually said, this is the plan. We're going to no longer have this stupid, politics of fear, and instead politics of opportunity. And that opportunity is about paying attention to what needs to get done. And I think that, with all of us just saying it over and over and over again, that and there are paths. We know what we can do. It's not like there is a lot of really hard science that needs to be done.
Yeah.
But there is an idea that there are going to be some key things that we can do, and we need to do them at every level. We need to do them. I loved what the conversation was earlier, that we need to do them in every one of those departments. USDA is a lot of money that we need to refocus. There is a lot of subsidies going into fossil fuels. We need to refocus that. We need to put a lens on every single one of our policies and say, does it hurt the solution? Does it hurt our planet? Or does it help it and create opportunity?
And it has to be urgent, because if we don't get out of our comfort zone, climate change will do that for us.
So I want to add real quick before we go to the Q&A. Just something
really quick, because I want to get like 2 questions in, because we're almost at the top of the hour.
I was on a panel a couple of years ago, and there was like this old white dude, I forget his name, and he was just like,
years ago. How old are you? Like 12?
I think I was 15, 16. I started in the movement when I was 14. So I'm 14, 18 now. There's been 4 years, almost 5 years.
Let's just call him old white dude. We'll call him old white dude.
He was an old white guy, and he was like, like the reason why we haven't solved the climate crisis yet is that all these women and Black people are like calling for their rights, and like we have to focus on climate change. And I was just like, that is literally, but so many people think like that. They're like, no, we got to focus on climate. Screw all these other issues. And it's like, no. Like, I don't think they understand that that's actually actively harming the climate crisis. Everything is intersected. Every single issue is intersected. I mean, another issue that I deeply care about, because that's my community, is the LGBT community.
Right.
And I'm lucky enough that when I came out, I was accepted by my parents, but a lot of youth and LGBT folks aren't. So there's a high level of homelessness. Now, when you're homeless outside with those raging fires, you're going to feel the impacts a lot worse than if you have shelter and air filters and everything like that. So even issues that people don't think have anything to do with the climate crisis, like LGBTQ plus rights, they actually do intersect. So I can, like, every single issue that you name, something intersects with the climate crisis. And that's what people need to understand.
So all great points, and first of all, I appreciate all this conversation is exactly what we wanted to happen. It was free flowing. We created a new jingle, which is great. I mean, fun fact, right? Oh, did we, Andy, record that, because I got that for my next podcast, Cristela Alonzo. But listen, we do have a couple of questions. We might be able to just squeeze in one. But I actually picked one that I thought might be interesting, because it is still tied to electoral politics. So let me read this question from Lisa in New York, and let me read it, and then I'll toss it out to our 3 fabulous guests. Do you think the Biden administration should focus on immediately reversing the rollbacks of regulations, even though they didn't really address environmental justice or equity, which is the easiest thing to do, or focus on revamping the system and creating new regulations to address climate justice, which may take many more years? So, Elizabeth, do you want to think about that one now? Because I feel like it's the strategy, right, that you're saying. So what do you think?
So I was the chair of the US EPA National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and I could tell you that they never went far enough. But I think a rollback is important, because we need some baseline protections. I think the time that it would take to put those protections in place, that we would lose lives. And so I think that the minimum, the smallest thing that they can do is basically make sure that those protections are put in place and use them as a baseline and not as the bar.
Yeah. All right. One more question. I'm going to squeak this one in, and I'll toss this one out for Jamie and Teresa. As an environmental scientist, and this is from Felicia in California, as an environmental scientist, how can I help educate the people in my community to recognize that climate change is a threat to them as much as it is a threat to the natural world and its resources? So besides looking at red skies and being like, hello, Teresa, how do you begin to educate the community? And then Jamie, you can jump in.
I think you walk outside. right? You walk outside and breathe the air, and I think that's really it. But I think what we need to do is part of what I think happens in a lot of things. We need to not beat up those people who didn't understand it before. Right? We need to not beat up people who voted for Trump. They're working class. They didn't, he didn't give any policies or anything that really helped them. We need to help. We need to do it in a way that says, oh, this is what it means for you, and actually try to tell the lesson, because I think that in many people, they do want to believe in it. Right. And so we need to be we actually have to be kind of gentle about how we re-educate.
Love. I think Teresa's you're like my new adopted aunt. You're it's like, hello, everyone just be, that's a great way. Great attitude.
You can do anything you want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Jamie, what about? Yeah, Jamie, what about you? How, besides what you said before, it's like you don't need data-driven.
I feel like a lot of people, when you talk about environmentalism, they think of someone shaming you for using a straw or something, and so a lot of people are turned off by environmentalism because they think it means someone I don't know, coming for you for not doing the right thing. And I think it's very important. I think it was recently learned that the term carbon footprint, the way it is modernly used now, was invented by the oil industry. I saw this thing online that the way that, while the oil industry is torching down the entire world, they're but don't forget to recycle and reuse, and this whole reduce, reuse, recycle. And there's nothing wrong with being sustainable, but the whole pointing fingers at the individual, how dare you use a plastic straw, you single-handedly are causing the climate crisis, is that is orchestrated by the fossil fuel industry, so that we're all pointing fingers at each other and not at them, because they are the ones causing this. But we're all oh, he used a plastic bag once, and then that's the issue. And so I think that when you're talking to educating people, I think you should emphasize that that's not the kind of environmentalism I'm talking about, because that kind of individual shaming environmentalism turns a lot of people off. So when you're talking to someone about the climate crisis and climate justice and intersectionality, I think the question is about intersectionality. Find an issue that impacts them and then connect it to the climate crisis and be see this issue that you thought had nothing to do with climate change. This is how it's connected.
Yeah. So thank you, first of all, to the three of you. Cristela, they were fabulous. I mean, fabulous.
I learned a lot, and that's actually a compliment.
There you go.
No, I learned a lot in presenting facts in different ways that resonate with people.
Yeah,
which is so important. Then to me, saying that I learned something in different perspectives that actually complement each other and are speaking of the same thing was very welcomed, and it was so great because all three of you had such different perspectives about the same thing.
Yeah, this is amazing. So I want to thank each of you, Cristela, and I want to thank you. You guys were fantastic. Want to thank Now This, Fuse, Climate Power 2020, Facebook, Twitter. We were on Twitter. This will replay. We'll have this if you missed it. We'll pop it up on the Instagram on Latino Rebels. We'll also share it on our YouTube. Cristela, one little final takeaway so you learned something. If you walk away right now, what are you going to tell someone after this? This is what I learned. You got a minute.
I say that actually Elizabeth was really right earlier when she said, when actually all of them touched on it, indigenous ancestors, everything. My family's from Mexico. They come from, indigenous tribes. We did take care of the earth. We were raised on the earth. And one thing, reduce, reuse, and recycle, that's great in theory, but honestly, we have been doing it for years. I mean, if you go to so many people's households and there's a tub of butter in the fridge, chances are there's not butter in that fridge. We've been recycling forever.
I'm pretty sure there's not butter. So listen, everybody, follow us at Latino Rebels, follow all these fabulous voices. We want to thank, again, Climate Power 2020 for giving this little media outlet from Futuro Media a chance to do this amazing stream. There's so much we can continue, but I'm sure we'll continue. Stay involved, follow all these accounts. Julio, Ricardo, Varela, Latino Rebels Radio, just bolstered by knowledge. Have a great night.
Gracias.
Adios.
Adios.
Hasta el futuro.
Hasta el futuro.
Okay.